And I think that is the heartbeat of what Jesus models in the scripture. It's the heartbeat of what, kind of brings and solidifies us together as a community. But that is what I'm suggesting that we do to move forward. Realizing that we have a marred history, right? Realizing that every person before us has some type of historical shaping, right? We've all been given the taught, whether verbally or by watching somebody behave, and then questioning, what does God have to say about how we stand with our neighbor, love our neighbor, and move forward together? And so, I say all God's children because we are, man. And if we are to move forward, we have to confront the past, but we also have to be passionate about standing with our neighbor that's in front of us today. I woke up on the ground with EMTs running over to my body, bones broken in my face, and I heard this one EMT yell out, "Flip him over to see if he's alive." And I just break down, man, and I'm like, I cannot move. I was questioning my value, my worth, all of those things. And she says, "You may not be able to move, but you can use your mind." And I was like, oh, yeah, I can still think, and I can think, and I can write, and I can, do a different form of work. And then I started to realize that worth is even connected to grace, right? That my worth is not tied to any type of perfectionism or any type of thing that I can produce, because if I'm only focused on that, then I'm going to let myself down every time. And if there's no grace there to say, I'm still worthy whether I achieve this thing or not, I'm still worthy whether I can walk across the room or not, I'm still worthy whether this has impact or not, I'm detaching how I think God feels about me and how I feel about myself from the actual activity itself. And that's been so grounding for me. So I would just say, man, I would encourage, people who may be just in a hard place to remember that hard place does not mean that you're less worthy. That the hard place does not mean that you shouldn't give yourself grace. As a matter of fact, you should give yourself more grace than life has been hard on you. And, that's just a really powerful thing to think about. I remember being all nervous, and I had a 34-minute presentation. I had about 40 plus people show up online, and I go through my presentation. And then there's another 2 hours of just Q&A from my committee. And then another 10 to 15 minutes of deliberation. And that was the longest 10 to 15 minutes I ever experienced in my life. What did they think? Just kind of wondering. And my dissertation chair called me, and she told me to enter back into the Zoom room. And she says, congratulations, we welcoming you to the academy, and you're Dr. Lester. And I was like, are you serious? I said, are you serious? I'm a real doctor. I'm a real doctor. And it was just a lot of affirmation, man. And man, my kids got to see that, right? Ph.D.s do come from Hamilton Road. So I was just I can, you know what I mean?
Thanks for joining us for another Kingdom Conversation on Voice in the Kingdom. So grateful for every opportunity we have to come together and share what folks are doing all over the world doing kingdom work and trying to advance what the Lord is doing in his kingdom, and all the different voices that we've been able to bring together and have share their stories so that you have something that resonates with you and maybe something you're thinking about doing or something the Lord is working with you on. There's always somebody's testimony that's going to resonate with you, that's going to light a fire. And that's one of the things I love that we get to do here at Voice in the Kingdom. Would love for you to subscribe and share and all of that good stuff, all the podcast platforms, as well as finding us on YouTube at Voice in the Kingdom as well. So today I'm very excited to bring on with me a good friend of mine, Terence Lester of Love Beyond Walls. Hey there, brother. How are you?
How's it going, Q?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm so excited. And what's crazy is, when we met, we lived in 2 different states, and now we live in the same state and not that far, actually. So hopefully we get to actually meet in person sometime soon again. But I'm just excited to see what all that's been going on in your ministry and what the Lord's been doing with your books and the recent addition to some things that we can add to your name. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So for folks that may not have been following along with Love Beyond Walls, Terence Lester has recently completed his Ph.D. So I need to update something real quick. Everybody ready? There it is. Dr. Terence Lester. Or we can even do this one. This one has the letters at the end. You've just all this work and they just throw letters on there, man.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for you, man. I know you've worked hard at this, and we're going to get into that story in a little bit. Man, when you and I first met, you were getting ready to do a church plant, but you were telling me about this ministry you were getting ready to do to reach out to homeless, Love Beyond Walls. And so you ended up diving into this full time, and God has done so much good with it, man. So let's help people come along this journey with you. Tell me about the beginnings of how Love Beyond Walls came about, bro.
Yeah, man, it's funny because it's almost been a decade, right?
Right.
Just thinking about the origin story of Love Beyond Walls. Man, the shortened version is my wife and I had been doing outreach for, quite some time, like all throughout our 20s. And, we always just like love to gather people together and as well as like go out and just be present with those who are unhoused. And I'll never forget, I was building this relationship. It was probably around the ending of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I was building a relationship with this guy named Kurt. He was unhoused, living in the heart of the city behind an abandoned building. I mean, tons of trash, garbage everywhere. And man, it was in the middle of like November, and it was like extremely cold.
Yeah.
So for 3 months, I just been building a relationship with him. Every single week I would go and like have breakfast with him. And, Kurt was always say, "You're going to stop showing up, right?" And I was just like, "Kurt, I don't really think you know me, man." So I just kept showing up, right? And I showed up so much to one particular morning where we were having like biscuits, and he decided to share his personal story with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it took 3 months for him to just like tell me anything about himself, and he told
feel
me
like
that
you were going to be there so he could open up.
Yeah. And man, he shared that he had lost his wife and his child in a car accident. He had a corporate job. He became depressed and lost everything, could no longer function on his job, and ended up behind the building. And me, kind of like in my wanting to help, because, like us, we just want to fix things, right?
Yeah.
I asked him if I could, take him to a shelter. And that's when Kurt flipped it on me, man. He says, "There's a shelter not too far from here. 500 or so guys are sleeping in chairs. There's one restroom. The smell is so thick, it will choke you." And he says, "As a matter of fact, I wouldn't get any sleep, and I would be up all night protecting everything I own and possessing this bag." And he pointed to his backpack. And he says, "Why don't you do it?" And, I'll never forget him saying that, because I took that home on the ride home. I took it all the way to the dinner table where my wife is like, "What's going on with you?" in front of our young kids while we're eating. And I said, I think God maybe asking me to do something that may be a little bold. And she said, well, what's that?
Drastic a little bit,
Yeah,
yeah.
drastic. And I say, man, I think I'm supposed to live on the streets. And she says, what? And I was like, yeah, if I'm going to be willing to serve or walk in the shoes
Yeah.
of those that I'm willing to serve, then I got to put them on. And long story short, man, my wife dropped me underneath a bridge
Wow.
in the heart of the city, and I lived on the streets for a number of days, just documenting those experiences. And that was the origin story of Love Beyond Walls.
Yeah, I remember that, and I remember that first campaign, and I remember following that journey because you did so well on social media, letting people know what was going on and letting people that aren't seen have a voice. And I remember you talking about this and saying, I can't believe that people are having to make these decisions. Like Kurt said, I would rather not even go to a shelter because of what it is. I'd rather stay on the streets because of how this. And so with that experience, and then you went through campaigns of wearing one pair of shoes and walking a long way, I remember, and then you did one where you didn't change outfits, and you went through this whole process of showing people like, this is what this is about. What is one of the things you maybe learned about yourself in this journey of trying to connect with the unseen, the unhoused?
Yeah, I was really able to tap into, I guess, my gifting and the ability to tell stories
Mm-hmm.
in a way that centers the voices of those who are unseen, invisible, and unheard, and how that kind of really allows people who are marginalized in some way to experience the intangible love that many people get a chance to enjoy in community, like to be noticed, to
Yeah.
be heard, to be seen in a way that suggests that I too have worth and inherent value, right? And
Uh-huh.
so like I really was able to learn that about myself. And I just like I love that God has given me this gift, unique gift to be able to ensure that people didn't feel invisible. And, I have that passion just as strong now as I did when I first started.
And that experience of learning what that all meant and how that all went about actually, and learning how to tell stories has impacted your doctoral approach too. Like, you ended up not just writing a big paper, you did a documentary as part of your PhD and having to defend that. So we know that that impacted the end of the story that we're going to hear today. How did it impact your family? I mean, we know now what you just said about yourself, but I mean, your wife and your kids, it impacted your whole family, man.
Yeah, I think it brought us closer together as a family because, although I did a lot of work, my family always has seen the work that I've done as this
Uh-huh.
is our work, right?
Yeah.
And they have been able to join in. I mean, my wife is co-founder and she does just as much as I do, maybe behind the scenes, but she's impacting women and children and doing different things
Uh-huh.
out of her own passions. My daughter has become like a really strong children's advocate. We
And
just
an author
co-authored.
in her own.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, we just co-authored a children's book dealing with homelessness. So
Wow.
it that kind of like chronicles our relationship and how
Uh-huh.
she's come to work with me when she was a kid and how she learned how to have compassion towards those who are, unhoused and
Uh-huh.
those who are even, bullied in school
Yeah.
for, showing up with visible signs of poverty, right?
Right.
And then my son is just, you know, he's always just had this heart of like wanting to serve, like wanting
Yeah.
to assist, wanting to help. And I think that all stems from our family being on this journey of making service a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your daughter and the co-author, and I know that you are super proud of that, and I've loved watching that journey through social media as well. But what kind of, tell us a little bit about this, maybe I don't know if transition is the right word, but going from having this boots on the ground ministry to becoming an author, and we're going to talk about the PhD in a minute, but transitioning from that boots on the ground stuff to also being an author and doing that work at the same time. How did that
Right.
come about, and why did you feel like it was important to start, putting this stuff on paper?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, coincidentally, man, I've always been a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Started writing poetry and books as early as, my teen years. I self-published my first book when I was 21, my second book when I was 23, and I self-published probably 4 or 5 books in my 20s. And
Mm.
so that had always been like a rhythm of mine, like writing as a form of catharsis, helping me to overcome a lot of things and challenges that I had gone through when I was a teenager myself. Like I had experiences with homelessness as a teen, and
Yeah.
growing up in family dysfunction and all of those things. And so writing had always been a vehicle. When I started to show up and like serve in community, I was really saying that, if I'm not able to communicate on a week in, week out basis or write all the time, I wanted my life to be a sermon, right? And so like this is how I feel now as I've been able to show up with my family and volunteers who have come side us. We have lived our lives in a way where it has communicated a message. And I started to think about like all of the stories and experiences that I had gleaned over the years. And I wanted to, kind of jot them down because we see this as a body of work that is growing, that will outlive us. And if we don't capture these moments and stories in a way that is able to pass along vital information of how to see, how to love, how to create belonging for those
Mhm.
who've been marginalized, then we're not stewarding this opportunity that God has given us.
Man, and I think your current book that's going to be coming out through Varsity Press. It's a few months away from actually releasing. I know you just released an excerpt, "All God's Children," and this is truly a journey from this unseen and all the things we've dealt with the last couple of years. What's something from that book that maybe you can articulate here that lets people understand where you're coming from, of how you're trying to bring all God's children together and see each other? Because I say this on my radio show all the time. You're never going to look into the eyes of someone that God doesn't love. And
Agree.
you've captured that in such a way that you've done it in action. You've done it with your pen. You've done it with your documentaries. And I think this book that's coming, All God's Children, is kind of a culmination even of a lot of that. It sounds like to me, just by the little bit I've got to look at.
Yeah, I mean, man, when I think about racial unrest that has happened over the last 3 years, I mean, historically,
Uh-huh.
um, and just where we are as a society, I was really starting to feel the pressure as a Black man
Uh-huh.
in society and culture. And like, I serve a bunch of people in our community who are Black and brown. And people really started, just kind of wanting to know, how is it that we move forward in a way that is both, real, is tangible, but it's not ignorant of where we have been, right? And
Right.
so I started to look at my own historical shaping, the history that we have in this country, and being truthful about how it is still showing up. The residue of what has happened is
Uh-huh.
still showing up and manifesting itself in various ways when we see things on the television or in political speech or from people who have racial hatred in their heart. And so,
Mhm.
like, how do we speak to that? But we also give this message of like solidarity. How do
Yeah.
we move people to stand with others who have been oppressed in some way? How do we move people to really get a chance to sit and listen to their neighbor, not
Mhm.
just love their neighbor, but listen to their neighbor?
Yeah.
And then also listen to the cries and the issues that the neighborhood faces, that the neighbor is emerging from,
Mhm.
and also being moved with compassion to stand with that neighbor as a neighbor is, facing all types of challenges. And I think that is the heartbeat of what Jesus models in the scripture. It's the heartbeat of what, kind of brings and solidifies us together as a community. But that is what I'm suggesting that we do to move forward,
Yeah.
realizing that we have a marred history, right?
Mhm.
Realizing that every person before us has some type of historical shaping, right? We've
Mhm.
all been given the taught, whether verbally or by watching somebody behave,
Mhm.
and then questioning, what does God have to say about how we stand with our neighbor, love our neighbor, and move forward together? And so I say all God's children because we are, man. And if we are to move forward, we have to confront the past, but we also have to be passionate about standing with our neighbor that's in front of us today.
Man, and I think one of the things that I've noticed is there's people that are finding out about themselves some of the things that they didn't know they thought in a certain way because of a stereotype or because of a traditional family thing or maybe even a church they were involved in.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of church hurt. There's a lot of tension with, different racial backgrounds, different things like that well up because we don't even know they're there sometimes. So if somebody's sitting here watching us talk right now and think in the context of the last couple of years, well, I don't have a problem. What would you say to them to help them see?
Yeah. Yeah. I think anything, Martin Luther King Jr. is one of many people that I really admire from the civil
Mhm.
rights era, but he had this philosophy of a beloved community. And with this beloved community mindset, he is viewing, the world as our address. He uses language like world house, and we are interconnected, interdependent, interrelated,
Yeah.
meaning that whatever happens to my neighbor, if I see parts of myself in my neighbor, it's also happening to me, right?
Uh-huh.
And to be in a place where we say, I'm not like that, but we have knowledge that things that are, oppressive or racially motivated with hatred that is harming our neighbor, then that should concern us. We shouldn't, kind of retreat to our bubbles or
Go back to our corners, right? Yeah.
our corners and say, that's not affecting me. That's not like me. When in essence, what we really need are people to say, this shouldn't exist. I need to lock arms with those who are being harmed by racial hatred or injustice.
Uh-huh.
And I need to stand to make sure that they know that they are the beloved of God, just as I am.
Yeah. Amen. Do you feel like words like systemic and things like that we've heard a lot the last couple of years, do you feel like that's triggering to one side or the other? Is it
Yeah.
helpful to say words like that? Should we find ways to articulate better? Like, because for me, in a lot of different circles, and I've been around a
Yeah.
lot of different people my whole life from a lot of different countries. So for me, it's never been something I've thought about. The last couple of years, as it's bubbled back up to the surface for people, I'm looking around at myself thinking, what did I miss? What's
Right.
systemic about this? And
Yeah.
now, and personally, okay, I used to drive an 84 Cutlass with the windows tinted. All right. And I bumped the music a little loud. And I found out that there was a college campus security guy following me. So one day I decided to pull off and let him come up to the door. I put the window down. I said, "Can I help you?" And he looked shocked. So I realized that he was following me for a reason that had nothing to do with me driving wrong or the music blaring. He had a presupposition about who was in that vehicle.
Yeah.
Same vehicle, different circumstance, out of college. I'm driving down the road in a town where I grew up that had some history with certain issues that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
I get pulled over. I roll down the window, same response, completely shocked. And I asked, "Officer, what did I do?" And he said, you took that turn back there a little wide. Have you had any drinks?" And I'm like, "You sound like you had to think about that." So he didn't pull me over for any actual infraction. So those two circumstances, just for me personally, I started thinking back to that the last couple of years and
Yeah.
thinking, so if I had that experience and I was able to shock someone when they opened the door, what are other people dealing with that is systemic in a way that makes people confront this?
Yeah. Yeah, man. When I think of the term systemic, I think of origin, I think of foundational, I
Mm-hmm.
think of things that have been designed, right? That
Uh-huh.
functions in a certain way.
Yeah.
And for me, I because I'm a black man, I don't see terms like that as being something that is offensive to me,
Uh-huh.
because it helps me to understand the history that has impacted people who have my same skin color, right?
Right.
Whether it's, redlining or mandatory minimums or stop and frisk or some of these systemic, when I go back, originated things that were designed to target black and brown people,
Yeah.
then it helps me to connect how it manifests or shows up in people who may not be overtly racist, right? Uh, I gave this talk, bro, um, at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. It was for a night of ideas, and they wanted me to talk about homelessness from a beloved community perspective. And
Um,
so I'm in my notes, I'm thinking about like the angles, and then hostile architecture actually came up for me. I was like, oh, okay, I'll talk about hostile architecture. But as I started to jot down things about hostile architecture, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with my grandfather, who is still alive. He's 80, almost 89, right?
wow.
Almost 90 years old. And he was talking about a different form of hostile architecture that was put in place in water fountains he couldn't drink from.
Yeah.
Hostile architecture put in place were signs that said that he had to enter into the back of a restaurant or he couldn't stand in certain places.
Right.
Hostile architecture when he was made to sit in the back of a bus or he couldn't attend certain high schools. Like for me, when he's talking about these things, that was systematically designed
Yeah.
to exclude, right?
Right.
That was this form of overt racism, right?
Yeah.
Now, as time progressed and, more laws were kind of taken away, we moved from de jure to de facto. De jure laws mean that these are laws that were designed by law to discriminate. And when the laws were removed, de facto means that it went from being an actual law to still being something that was embodied, right?
Yeah.
The mentality didn't leave. The
In the
heart didn't
DNA
leave.
of,
The DNA didn't leave. And
yeah.
when we talk about systems, we have to deal with the DNA and the origination of where these thoughts and feelings and attitudes and dispositions toward black and brown people come from. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, I love that how you articulate that and brought the story of your grandfather in there because, a lot of times people can remove themselves or go back to their corners, as we said earlier, by saying, well, oh, that was X amount of years ago. That's one generation removed for you. And, I mean, it's hard, when we really come to the grips of our own humanity sometimes to think that we were capable of treating people that way. Time is undefeated, though. It's happened in every
Yeah.
era.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we need to find ways to move forward. And that's what I love about what you do, about helping people be seen, because though you're advocating for the Black community because of your identity, you're also saying, let's be a community and let's make sure that it's not skin color that identifies us as a group, but that we're able to come together in ways as God's children, but still knowing who we are and where we come from. And I feel like you do such a great job of that. And you can always tell in an argument with someone, whoever's yelling is probably a lot more scared of of whatever they're talking about than the person that calmly articulates like you do. So I love your approach, man. So let's transition. I think we've covered some spectacular ground, and hopefully people will understand that this book is going to be a special one to come out and for them to take a look at it when it does. All God's Children from InterVarsity Press. You had some pretty big things happen not that long ago that you've, through God's help and a community's help and your family's help, you've overcome. So take us back. I guess it's several months ago now that you guys were on your way home from an event and your whole
Yeah.
lives changed dramatically in a moment. So I know that it'll probably be a short version and for you to truncate it in the best way you can, but tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah. My wife and I 10 months ago were, uh, asked to come to an event where our organization was being awarded like this philanthropic award.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of celebrating. And, we go home, and the next night we say we want to go out with friends to kind of celebrate it, because you know how it is, man. Once
Yeah.
you go achieve something, or like something happens, you kind of like just blow by it. But this time we wanted to go out and just kind of celebrate and just praise God for what God was doing. And we go to dinner, and it's late. It's around probably 10:40, close to 11 o'clock. And I asked my wife to drive home because I was really tired. And I fell asleep in the car. I woke up on the ground with EMTs running over to my body.
Phew.
Bones broken in my face, and I heard this one EMT yell out, "Flip him over to see if he's alive." And I looked up, and my wife and I had been in a pretty severe car accident. She was limping around the car. I woke up again in the hospital um, to a surgeon saying that he had to perform 2 emergency surgeries, and one of them lasted a couple hours, and then the next one lasted almost 7 hours.
Wow.
And then I ended up being in the hospital for a month. I had crushed both my hip and my pelvis, and had the ortho surgeon saying that, I probably wouldn't be able to walk again for a year to a year and a half.
Right.
And that was scary, man. I get out of the hospital, I come home, and I mean, I was just months and months in a bed, unable to move on my own, like fix food on my own, walk to the bathroom on my own, like do any of these things. And I was going through so much nerve pain. I was taking probably, 20 plus pills a day just to reduce the amount of pain that I was having, but it wasn't taking it away. And so, man, God allowed one of my close friends now, who is a doctor. He has a private practice. He came over to my house every Sunday for months and worked with me, physical therapy, all of the things, and got me back up and able to walk a lot faster than what they were telling me. And so I began walking on my own without any ADA accommodations in like 6 months. So it was,
Man, that's awesome.
a lot less time. Yeah.
You've had to come through so much, and how has that shaped now your ministry and how because you went from a specific group and community of people that you're helping to now another unseen group, not like you didn't know they weren't there before, but people that need accommodations because of immobility or some other situation. Has that kind of reshaped how you look at seeing people?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. Those who are living with a disability, whether permanently or temporarily, my heart has, I've always been aware, but
Right.
like going through the experience of myself and realizing that certain buildings aren't designed that service those who live with a disability, and people are mean-spirited towards those who live with a disability. And I remember times people laughed at me when I was in my wheelchair or had my walker in front of my children. and just starting to see the deep insensitivity of,
Yeah.
what is projected on a community that is also beloved. I started to also realize that, worth itself isn't predicated on mobility.
Right.
That just because a person lives and breathes, whether they live with a disability or not, their worth is not defined based
Man.
upon movement. And that was a huge message that I learned myself, because I mean, my whole ministry and my life has been centered around mobility.
Well, yeah,
And God,
one of your campaigns was sleeping on top of a bus for a while, so you wouldn't have been
sleeping
able
on
to.
top of the bus, or, walking across the country to
Right.
advocate. And I really had to get to this place where it was like, God reminded me not only of my own worth, but the worth of those
Yeah.
who are precious and invisible because they live with a permanent or temporary disability. And although I can move again a little bit, I mean, I still live with a disability because I have rods and pins and all of the things
Uh-huh.
inside me. And so, yeah, my heart is like just open even wider.
Yeah,
And,
pulled a Grinch, it grew 3 sizes,
yeah, bro. Yeah. The other thing I would like, I just want to say this too, man. Like, even, I know we're going to mention a little bit about my doctoral work, but
Yeah, yeah.
doing ethnographic research on the streets of Tennessee, and
Uh-huh.
literally encountering people who don't have a wheelchair and they live with a disability, shelter systems within the community that don't have ADA accommodations and aren't like properly, um, you know, uh, designed to handle those who may be unhoused and live with a disability. And then you start to think about the pricing of things, like a wheelchair, like a
Yeah.
walker, like some of the things that are necessary for people who live with such. And so, man, I just have a huge heart to make sure that people who are invisible are seen.
And now too, speaking of this work for this PhD that you've worked through, you were already working on it when the accident happened. When you
Yeah.
had to relearn how to walk, you were still driving after this goal. Why was it important to you to finish this PhD? Why was it important to you to make sure that it was a documentary and it was on this particular topic like we're talking about today?
Yeah. I'll be honest, man. I wanted to quit. I remember being in the hospital, unable to move, and I know the semester was about to start again. It was going to be my last semester, and my wife is sitting across from me, and I just break down, man. And I'm like, I cannot move. I don't have. I was questioning my value, my worth, all of those things, and
Uh-huh.
she says, you may not be able to move, but you can use your mind.
Uh,
And I was like, oh, like, yeah, like I can still think, and I can, I can think, and I can write, and I can, do a different form of work. And God used, my wife and, just borrowing her courage in that moment, to continue with school. And then I had professors who said that they would be willing to like work with me and all of these things, man. And, months just being unable to move and just being in front of my laptop, I had a lot of time to just think and process different things. And man, I just, it was personal. It was
yeah.
like, I remember living in my car when I was a teenager and sleeping in the park. And, I remember when I dropped out of high school and, had people that encouraged me to go back. And it was, I remember the work and all those stories, doing this work of Love Beyond Walls. And it was just like personal to me.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily about like the education or the status or anything. It was just like, this is something that I wanted to pursue as a way of opening myself up to serve at a greater capacity, to
Uh-huh.
advocate more, not just in churches, but in the academic space and other spaces that may not be paying attention to
Yeah, it
those
opens
who
doors.
are unseen. Yeah.
Yeah. I've often, you know, as we've stayed connected off and on over the years, I've always followed along, and I noticed after you came through this and learning how to walk and all the things you had to do, and I noticed, as encouraging as you've always been, you've shifted the conversation to worth in a different way since what you've come through. What did you find out about our individual worth, but also our worth as Christians? And we find our identity in Christ, obviously, but that worth that you can find in accomplishing a goal despite the circumstances, that worth when you are serving and finding that purpose that God has put in you. What have you learned along this journey that you maybe somebody is trying to figure out what they're worth today?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just learned that my worth was not tied to anything that I could achieve, anything that wasn't tied to any form of exterior things. Like, my worth was valid because Jesus gave his life for me and God loved me, and
Yeah.
that was enough. And that in turn gave me the courage to show up. I think there's a sense of worthiness with the
Yeah.
response. I'm just going to show up with everything I have in
Uh,
this moment.
yeah.
Um, Not trying to perform or like manufacture or force, but everything that I have in this moment makes God love like real to me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then I started to think about like the way in which God cares for the lilies of the field, right? The birds of the air, like very
Uh-huh.
simplistic things, right? And that if God cares for, just these very simple and basic things, how much more does God care for me? And like that was really,
Uh-huh.
um, that was like, it just released the pressure. And
Yeah.
then I started to realize that worth is even connected to grace,
Yeah.
right?
That's good.
That my worth is not tied to any type of perfectionism or any type of thing that I can like produce.
Yeah.
Because if I'm only focused on that, then I'm going to let myself down every time.
Yeah.
And if there's no grace there to say, I'm still worthy whether I achieve this thing or not. I'm still worthy whether I can walk across the room or not. I'm still worthy whether this has impact or not. Like, I'm detaching um, how I think God feels about me and how I feel about myself from the actual activity itself. And that's been so grounding for me. So I would just say, man, I would encourage, people who may be just in a hard place to remember that that hard place does not mean that you're less worthy.
Yeah.
That the hard place does not mean that you shouldn't give yourself grace. As a matter of fact, you should give yourself more grace than life has been hard on you.
Yeah.
And that's just a really pr- powerful thing to think about.
Yeah. You just sounded like a guy that wrote a big chunk of the New Testament. Paul said, I can't boast in anything of myself. I can only boast of Jesus Christ. He also said that Jesus told him in one of the encounters, my grace is sufficient for you.
Sufficient.
I
Come on.
mean,
Come on.
so, we were in this transition in the business. I would say it's a terrible time to bring this up. However, we're getting close to the end of the time. All of that said is extremely powerful and valid, but you did just achieve something. And I want you to take us to that moment of defending your dissertation and being able to say that you accomplished the goal that you set out to do. What did that feel like? And explain to the people listening the shirt you had made. I saw it on social media. I can't remember the name of the town right now or the street, but you specifically said, you know, a PhD can come from where I came from. And
Yeah.
I love that. So tell us about that moment, man.
Man, it was surreal. I mean, the whole morning just reflecting on the fact that, man, I made it to the place that many teachers and educators and people said that I would never get to. And, I was just reflecting on the fact that my voice and my research does belong in the academy, right?
Yeah.
Not just the streets, but also the academy, and not just my research, but the research that advocates on behalf of the population of people that I emerged from, and as well as the people that I care so much about, man. And I remember being all nervous, and I had a 34-minute presentation. I had about 40 plus people show up online, and I go through my presentation, and then there's another 2 hours of just Q&A from my committee, and then another like 10 or 15 minutes of deliberation. And that was the longest 10 to 15 minutes I ever experienced in my life. Like, what did they think? Just kind of like wondering. And my dissertation chair called me, and she told me to enter back into the Zoom room, and she says, congratulations, like, we welcoming you to the academy, and like, you're Dr. Lester. And I was like, are you serious? I said, are you serious? Like, I'm a real doctor? I'm a real doctor. And it was just a lot of affirmation, man. And man, my kids got to see that, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And Campbellton, like, I grew up on Campbellton Road, man, which is like any other city that is dense, and has a lot of concentrated poverty. It's a lot of poverty, and just one of those areas where it's just like, it's hard to break free from if you don't have exposure and mentors and community and access and all of those things, man. And I reflect back on, even some of the people that never was able to make it out. And I just realized, like, when I was driving home after they had told me I had passed, that I could tell my children, yeah, I had a hard life. Yeah, I grew up with some circumstances, but PhDs do come from Campbellton Road. So I was just like, I can, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I didn't know nothing about that road, but when I saw you say that and I saw it on your shirt, I thought that resonates for anybody that's from anywhere.
Yeah.
There was another guy that anytime they said where he was from, they said, can something good come out of Nazareth? I mean,
right. Exactly. And that was the scripture, bro, honestly, that really kind of motivated and inspired that thought. Like, he's a carpenter's son,
who is this guy? Right.
Who is this guy? Right. Yeah.
So now you have access to a space of people that now have to listen of everything. And like you said, it didn't have to have the validity for your worth, but now for the people that you are advocating for, it carries weight.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially like, I'm really interested in decriminalizing the experience of homelessness, and to be able to use research as a valid response to people who create laws that are distanced from this community. And in real time, these laws actually cause harm, right? My whole research was around, how does public policy actually impact the sense of self-worth to those living on the streets in real time? And so my research speaks to that. And I can use this data to find gaps in policies that are passed that exclude this community from ML King's beloved community.
Wow, man. I mean, we could probably keep talking for a whole nother hour, but we're going on a little bit for these short attention fans that they probably won't
Yeah.
stay on much longer with us. So, what for people that have been kind of on board with Love Beyond Walls and know that it is a campaign-driven movement?
Yeah.
What's next, man? What's next? What's coming? Can you speak to that?
Man, I can tell you that some more campaigns are coming, possibly this year.
Awesome.
So be on the lookout for that, man. I would love to talk to you about something I'm thinking about doing post surgery and post.
Man, I'm excited already.
All of the things, man. I'm just
looking at your wheels turning right now. Like because I've seen that look before.
Yeah,
I remember sitting with you in the offices there before it was as known as it is now, and you asking me very direct questions about fundraising and some other things that you were thinking about at the time. And I knew then, like, this guy's going to do what he puts his mind to, and he's going to represent the people he's going to want to represent, and nothing's going to stop him. And in this conversation, we've learned that not even having to relearn how to walk is going to stop you from the goals that God has put in your heart and your family's heart. And so I encourage you, man, that whatever campaign's brewing, I know that the Lord is in it, and that it's going to bring eyeballs to the right people, and you're going to affect change. And I'm glad that that we've had the opportunity to meet and be connected and have this conversation today, man.
Amen, bro. Thank you, man.
Well, this has been
You'll see, though.
I'm excited. Well, I'm telling people right now, lovebeyondwalls.org, great site to go to, but also follow all the social media handles. And, you know, I texted you the other day. I said, congratulations, Dr. T. You know, so follow Dr. T here on all the social media stuff, Dr. Terence Lester. I know you already switched up that Twitter handle. You got the DR on there now. Thanks, man. I appreciate you, brother.
All right. Thank you.